What would you do if you discovered that the person you thought you knew best was living a life full of secrets? Imagine being a millionaire who's built a life of luxury and success, yet something feels off. James Whitman, a self-made millionaire, was the type of man who moved silently in a room full of noise. He built his wealth through a combination of smart investments, relentless work, and an innate sense for market trends. But unlike others in his financial circle, James never felt comfortable flaunting his success. His lifestyle was understated. No flashy cars or extravagant mansions. He believed wealth was a tool, not a trophy. To the public eye, he seemed like just another businessman. The only hint of his affluence was his love for collecting rare artwork and supporting local businesses, one of which belonged to his wife, Evelyn. Evelyn Whitman was a force of nature, creative, driven, and endlessly compassionate. She had built a small boutique downtown specializing in elegant, handcrafted jewelry. Every piece reflected her dedication and artistry, and over time, the shop became a hidden gem, adored by many for its unique designs. It was more than just a business. It was a manifestation of Evelyn's passion and values. One day, while attending a routine business luncheon, James overheard two associates talking about his wife's boutique. "How does she keep it going when the market's this unstable?" one of them questioned, casting a shadow of suspicion. "She must have some hidden backers," the other suggested, their tone dripping with insinuation. James felt a cold wave of doubt wash over him. He had never questioned Evelyn's integrity before, but these comments planted a seed of uncertainty. Could it be true? Was Evelyn hiding something from him? As he sat there, swirling his drink, his mind raced through all the possibilities. Had her shop's success come at a price he wasn't aware of? Instead of confronting her, James made a decision that surprised even himself. He would find out the truth his own way. The next morning, instead of heading to his office, he disguised himself as a beggar, a disheveled old man with a scruffy beard and worn-out clothes. He positioned himself right outside Evelyn's boutique, blending in with the city's invisible population. It was an unusual move for someone like James, a man accustomed to solving problems with logic and control. But this time, he felt something deeper at stake. His marriage, his trust, his very perception of the woman he thought he knew. As he sat on the cold pavement, watching customers drift in and out, he observed Evelyn from a distance. She greeted every person warmly, her smile genuine, her demeanor gracious. It seemed absurd that anyone could think ill of her, yet he couldn't shake the doubt. Hours turned into days, and each evening, just before closing, he noticed Evelyn slipping away into a narrow alley behind the shop. What was she doing? Hidden behind trash bins and shadows, James watched as Evelyn met a young woman and a small child in the dimly lit alley. They spoke in hushed voices, and he could see Evelyn passing something discreetly, a small bag, its contents a mystery. The woman's face lit up with gratitude, and she clutched the bag tightly. James strained to see more, but dared not reveal himself. Each night was the same ritual. Evelyn would meet the woman and the child, share a few words, and then return to her shop, her expression somber. It didn't make sense. Who were these people? Why was Evelyn sneaking around like this? Every new observation only added layers to the puzzle. James, ever the strategist, started piecing things together, but nothing fit. During his time disguised as a beggar, he noticed the cold stares, the dismissive glances from people he once considered friends. It was an eye-opening experience. The world looked different from the ground up, and he began to appreciate the grit it took to survive at the margins of society. But he couldn't let these revelations distract him. His focus was on Evelyn. On the third night, as he watched the alley once more, he saw the young woman clutch her child's hand and lean into Evelyn's embrace. There was a softness, an intimacy in that gesture. It spoke of shared pain, of unspoken stories. James's heart tightened. Was Evelyn supporting this family in secret? Driven by a mix of jealousy and curiosity, he decided to find out more. After his wife left, James approached the woman cautiously. She looked up, startled, shielding the child instinctively. "I'm not here to harm you," he murmured, keeping his voice low. I want to understand. Why does my wife meet you here every night?" The woman hesitated, her eyes scanning his face. "She didn't tell you?" she whispered, confusion and fear mingling in her gaze. James shook his head, feeling a pang of guilt. "No," he replied softly. "Please, I need to know." The woman sighed, glancing at her child. A little girl, no older than 6. "My husband was Evelyn's brother's friend," she began slowly. "When he died, we lost everything. Evelyn, she's been helping us ever since, but she made me promise never to tell anyone. She said people would judge, that they wouldn't understand." The revelation hit James like a punch to the gut. All this time, Evelyn had been using her shop's profits to support families like this woman's, families left behind by a world that valued wealth but forgot compassion, and she'd kept it all hidden, not for personal gain, but to protect them. James felt a surge of mixed emotions, relief, admiration, and a deep, aching sadness. He had been so quick to doubt, so willing to believe the worst. The woman looked at him cautiously, unsure of his reaction. "Please don't stop her," she pleaded quietly. There are others too. She's the only one who cares." James nodded slowly, his chest tightening. He had been blind, so blinded by his own insecurities that he failed to see Evelyn for who she truly was. But he wouldn't make that mistake again. He couldn't. The truth was out, but what would he do with it? Should he confront Evelyn now, or continue to watch, to understand her world more deeply? James knew there was more to uncover, more to learn about the quiet strength and sacrifice of the woman he called his wife. So he decided to keep his disguise a little longer. There was still so much he didn't know, and until he had the full picture, he wouldn't rest. And maybe, just maybe, he'd find a way to atone for his doubts and rebuild the trust he had almost shattered. He could see now that Evelyn was more than just the woman who shared his life. She was a beacon of hope, a quiet hero in a city of chaos. And as he sat back down in his usual spot, shivering in the night air, James realized that understanding Evelyn might just be the greatest comeback story of his life. James settled into his routine as a beggar, growing more familiar with the daily rhythm of the neighborhood. Each morning, he would take his place outside Evelyn's shop, blending into the scenery like an unnoticed shadow. From his vantage point, he saw the world through new eyes, witnessing the small acts of kindness, the cruelty, and the indifference that defined the street's pulse. People passed by without sparing him a second glance, never realizing the true identity of the man behind the ragged clothes. He began to understand just how invisible someone could become when stripped of status and wealth. And through it all, his focus never wavered from Evelyn. Evelyn, for her part, moved with grace and purpose, treating everyone who entered her store with the same warmth and attentiveness. Customers came in, some wealthy and poised, others modest but hopeful, all drawn to the unique charm of her creations. James watched as she helped each one, her eyes lighting up with genuine pleasure whenever a piece resonated with a customer. There was no deception here, no hint of a hidden agenda. But then, every evening, she would slip out quietly, always glancing over her shoulder before disappearing into the alley. Each time she left, James's heart clenched with anxiety. What was she hiding? One day, after nearly a week of silent observation, James couldn't take it any longer. He followed Evelyn at a careful distance, sticking to the shadows. When she reached the alley, he held his breath, watching as she approached the same young woman and her child. But tonight, there was a change. Instead of the usual quiet exchange, Evelyn looked tense, her voice urgent as she handed over not just a bag of supplies, but a small velvet pouch. The young woman's face blanched, her hands trembling as she took it. James leaned forward, straining to hear. "It's too much, Evelyn," the woman whispered, shaking her head. "I can't accept this." "You can and you will," Evelyn replied firmly, her tone leaving no room for argument. "It's for your daughter's education. I promised Michael I'd look after you both." The woman's resistance melted into tears, her body shaking with sobs. James' mind reeled. Who was Michael? What promise? And what did Evelyn mean by education? Questions swirled in his mind, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just about charity. There was a deep, personal connection here, one that Evelyn had kept hidden from everyone, even him. James decided to dig deeper. The next day, still in his beggar's disguise, he struck up conversations with the locals. At first, people avoided him, their eyes sliding past as if he didn't exist. But slowly, a few began to talk. They told him about Evelyn's reputation, a successful businesswoman with a heart of gold, known for her generosity. Some whispered about the ghost fund she kept, a mysterious reserve that seemed to appear out of nowhere whenever a family was in desperate need. "It's like she knows who's struggling before they even ask," one shopkeeper murmured, shaking his head in wonder. Intrigued, James pressed on, weaving a story of his own misfortunes to gain sympathy and information. It was through these conversations that he learned about Evelyn's brother, Michael, a talented artist who had died penniless, his dreams shattered by addiction and debt. Few knew the whole story, but it seemed that Evelyn had been trying to honor his memory in her own way. The more James uncovered, the more his admiration for Evelyn grew, but with it came a gnawing guilt. How could he have doubted her? How had he been so blind? Then, on the 8th day, something happened that changed everything. As James watched from his usual spot, a group of men approached the alley just as Evelyn arrived. His heart pounded as he recognized the leader, a burly man with a scar slashing across his cheek, one of the suppliers Evelyn had cut ties with months ago. "You think you can keep us out?" the man snarled, his voice low and dangerous. "We know about your little charity work. Bet your rich husband doesn't know where his money's going, does he?" Evelyn's face paled, but she stood her ground. "Leave now or I'll call the police," she said quietly, her hand already reaching for her phone. The man's expression twisted into a sneer. "Go ahead, but we both know how rumors spread. How long before your supporters find out you've been siphoning funds to nobodies like these?" He gestured contemptuously at the young woman, who shrank back, clutching her child protectively. "How long before your precious store goes under?" James felt a surge of fury so intense it almost knocked him off balance. Without thinking, he stepped forward, his voice a growl. "Get away from her!" The men turned, surprise flashing across their faces as they saw the ragged figure of the beggar. They laughed, a harsh mocking sound that grated on James's nerves. "Stay out of this, old man," the leader spat. But James didn't back down. He planted himself firmly between Evelyn and the thugs, his eyes blazing. "You heard me. Leave." There was a tense pause. Then the leader lunged. But James was ready. With a swift, practiced move, he deflected the blow and sent the man sprawling. The others hesitated, glancing at each other uncertainly. "Who the hell are you?" one muttered, his bravado wavering. James straightened, his gaze cold. "Just someone who's not afraid to protect what matters." Something in his tone made them back off, muttering curses as they slunk away. Evelyn stared at him, her face a mask of shock and confusion. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. For a long moment, James just looked at her, his heart aching with everything he wanted to say. Then slowly, he reached up and removed the ragged cap that had shielded his face for so long. "It's me, Evelyn," he said softly. "It's James." The world seemed to stand still as she took in his familiar features, the disbelief slowly giving way to recognition. "James?" she breathed, her eyes wide. What are you doing here?" He wanted to tell her everything, his doubts, his fears, the shame of having spied on her. But now wasn't the time. He stepped closer, gently cupping her cheek. "I had to know," he murmured. "I had to understand. And now I do." Tears welled up in Evelyn's eyes, but she blinked them back, shaking her head. What were you thinking?" she whispered fiercely. "You could have been killed." James just smiled, a bittersweet expression. "I was thinking that I couldn't stand by and lose you. Not when I finally see what you're fighting for." With his disguise discarded, James found himself standing in the middle of a whirlwind. He and Evelyn returned home in silence, each lost in their own tumultuous thoughts. The revelation of his identity, his secret surveillance, and the danger that had nearly ensnared them all weighed heavily between them. James wanted to apologize, to explain his reasons, but he could see that Evelyn wasn't ready to hear it. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured herself a glass of water, the glass rattling against the counter. "You followed me," she finally said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "For how long?" James swallowed hard, searching for the right words. "A week," he admitted quietly. "I didn't mean to deceive you, Evelyn. After what I heard, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong." He stepped closer, but she turned away, her shoulders tense. "And you thought spying on me was the solution?" she asked, her tone sharp with hurt. "Why didn't you just ask me, James?" The raw emotion in her voice cut through him like a knife. He had imagined this conversation 100 different ways, but none of them captured the reality of the pain in her eyes. "I was afraid," he confessed, his voice low. "Afraid that if I asked, I'd hear something I couldn't handle. Afraid that maybe Maybe you didn't trust me enough to tell me yourself." Evelyn turned around then, her gaze piercing. "And do you trust me now?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. James took a deep breath, nodding slowly. "Yes, more than ever." But even as he said it, he knew words weren't enough. He needed to show her, to prove that he was worthy of her faith. They sat down at the kitchen table, the same place where they had shared countless meals, laughter, and dreams. Now it felt like a battlefield. "Tell me everything," he urged softly. "I want to understand." Evelyn hesitated, her fingers twisting the hem of her blouse nervously. Then with a sigh, she began to unravel the story that had been hidden for so long. She spoke of her brother Michael, how his talent had been overshadowed by his struggles, how he had fallen into debt, and how in the end she had been unable to save him. "He was everything to me," she whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. "But no one else saw it. No one cared." James reached out, his hand hovering just above hers. "So, you built the boutique," he murmured, piecing it together. "Not just for yourself, but for him, to keep his memory alive." Evelyn nodded, wiping her eyes fiercely. "Yes, and when I started to succeed, I knew I couldn't just keep it for myself. There are so many like him, so many artists with no support, no safety net. I couldn't let them slip through the cracks, James. I had to do something." The depth of her commitment, the quiet strength that had fueled her actions, left him breathless. She wasn't just a businesswoman, she was a guardian, a beacon of hope for the forgotten. But then she looked at him, her gaze filled with a mixture of sorrow and defiance. "And now you've put all of it at risk," she whispered. "Those men, if they expose what I've been doing, it won't just ruin me. It'll ruin everyone I've helped." James flinched, guilt crashing over him. She was right. His actions, however well-intentioned, had jeopardized everything she had worked for. "I'm sorry," he said hoarsely. "I'm so sorry, Evelyn. But I won't let them hurt you, or anyone else." He stood up abruptly, determination hardening his features. "We're going to make this right. I'll make this right." Evelyn stared at him, her expression unreadable. "How?" she demanded. "They know too much. They'll come after us. After everyone I've tried to protect." James took her hands in his, squeezing them gently. "I have resources," he reminded her softly. "Money, connections, power. We'll use it to protect them, to protect you. But first, we have to expose those men for what they really are. Bullies trying to exploit good people." He could see the doubt flickering in her eyes, the fear that this was all too big, too dangerous. But beneath it, there was a spark, a tiny glimmer of hope. "James, they're ruthless," she warned, her voice trembling. "You don't know what they're capable of." He shook his head. "No, Evelyn, they don't know what we're capable of. Together." And just like that, he saw something shift in her expression. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a softening, a willingness to believe in him again. Slowly, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered, "but we have to be smart. If we're going to fight them, we need to do it on our terms." The next few days were a blur of planning and strategizing. James reached out to his contacts, calling in favors and gathering information. They worked late into the night, piecing together a strategy that would not only neutralize the threat, but also expose the thug's true nature to the public. James was relentless, his focus razor-sharp. He knew this wasn't just about protecting Evelyn's reputation. It was about redeeming himself, proving that he could be the partner she deserved. For the first time in years, they were working as a team, united by a shared purpose. Then came the night of reckoning. They arranged a meeting with the leader of the group in a secluded warehouse, a place far from prying eyes. Evelyn insisted on being there, despite James's protests. "I'm not hiding," she said firmly. "Not anymore." James knew better than to argue. Together, they stood side by side as the men swaggered in, their expressions smug. Well, look who decided to show up," the scarred leader sneered. "Ready to pay up, sweetheart?" Evelyn lifted her chin, her gaze steely. "Actually, we're here to make you an offer," she said coolly. The man's laughter was harsh and grating. "An offer? You've got nothing to bargain with." But James just smiled, a slow, dangerous smile. "Oh, I wouldn't say that." With a snap of his fingers, the doors burst open, and a team of reporters flooded in, cameras flashing. The thugs froze, confusion and panic spreading across their faces. "What the—" "This," James said quietly, his voice deadly calm, is what happens when you underestimate people like us. The reporters began firing questions, their lenses capturing every detail of the scene. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. These men have been threatening and extorting innocent people for months, she declared. But no more. Today, we're taking a stand. The leader tried to snarl something, but the cameras were already rolling, broadcasting his guilt to the world. There was no escape. As the police moved in, cuffing the thugs and leading them away, Evelyn turned to James, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You did it," she whispered. "You actually did it." James shook his head, pulling her into his arms. "No, we did it," he murmured, "together." And as they stood there, surrounded by flashing lights and the murmur of voices, James felt something shift inside him. He had risked everything, his pride, his identity, even his marriage. But in the end, he had found something far more precious, the unbreakable bond between them. With the confrontation behind them and the thugs in custody, James and Evelyn returned home, their hearts still racing from the adrenaline of the night's events. The house seemed to welcome them back with its familiar warmth, yet everything felt different, lighter, freer. As they stepped inside, Evelyn paused, glancing around as if seeing their home anew. "I can't believe we pulled that off," she murmured, her voice a mix of disbelief and relief. James smiled, his arms slipping around her shoulders. "I couldn't have done it without you," he replied softly. "You were incredible." Evelyn looked up at him, searching his eyes. "Why, James?" she asked quietly. "Why did you risk so much? You could have been hurt, or worse." Her gaze held 1,000 unspoken fears, and for a moment, James struggled to find the right words. "Because I needed to make it right," he said finally, his voice steady. "I needed to show you that I believe in you, in everything you've built, and I needed to prove to myself that I'm worthy of standing beside you." The vulnerability in his confession made Evelyn's breath catch. She reached up, cupping his face gently. "Oh, James," she whispered, "you've always been worthy. I just needed you to see it." They spent the next few days in a daze, caught between exhaustion and elation. News of the confrontation spread quickly, and soon the story of Evelyn's hidden charity work was making headlines. But instead of backlash, the public reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Donations poured in from people inspired by her courage and compassion. The boutique, once a quiet, unassuming shop, was suddenly thrust into the spotlight as a symbol of hope and resilience. "People are calling it the comeback story of the year," one reporter gushed, shoving a microphone toward Evelyn as she left the store. "How does it feel to be a hero?" Evelyn glanced at James, her smile soft but firm. "I'm no hero," she said simply. "I'm just someone who believes that everyone deserves a second chance." As they walked away, James couldn't help but marvel at her strength. Even now, after everything they'd been through, she remained unshaken in her purpose. But there was still one loose end, one final hurdle they needed to clear: the future of her foundation. With the truth out in the open, their enemies might be gone, but the challenges were far from over. Late one night, as they sat together in the living room, surrounded by stacks of letters and emails from people asking for help, James turned to Evelyn, his expression thoughtful. "What do you want to do now?" he asked quietly. "We've got all this attention, all these resources at our fingertips. We could expand, reach more people than ever before. But it's your decision, Evelyn. This has always been your dream." She looked at him, her brow furrowed in thought. "I want to help more people," she said slowly, "but we need to be careful. We can't lose sight of why we started this in the first place. It was never about money or fame. It was about honoring Michael and giving a voice to those who've been silenced." James nodded, admiration swelling in his chest. "Then we'll do it your way," he promised. "We'll keep it small, keep it personal, but we'll make sure that everyone who comes to us knows they're not alone." Evelyn's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she leaned in, resting her forehead against his. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing in me, for believing in us." And in that moment, James felt something settle inside him, an unshakable certainty that they were exactly where they were meant to be. They spent the following weeks laying the groundwork for a new chapter in their lives. With James's business acumen and Evelyn's unwavering vision, they restructured the foundation, creating a network of support for struggling artists and craftsmen. But this time, they did it together, as equal partners. "We need to think bigger," James suggested one afternoon, his eyes alight with excitement. What if we opened a gallery? A place where these artists can showcase their work, connect with buyers, and get the recognition they deserve. Evelyn's eyes widened, a slow smile spreading across her face. A gallery, she echoed softly. That could be incredible. And so, they began to plan. James threw himself into the project with a fervor that surprised even him, using every contact, every resource at his disposal to make their dream a reality. The gallery, once a distant hope, began to take shape, a vibrant, welcoming space where art and philanthropy intertwined. As the walls filled with colorful canvases and intricate sculptures, James felt a sense of pride unlike anything he'd ever known. This was more than just a business. It was a testament to their journey, a living, breathing tribute to everything they had overcome. But it wasn't just about the gallery. With each new artist they brought on board, with every family they helped, James saw the impact of their work ripple outwards. He saw it in the shy smiles of children who finally had a safe space to express themselves, in the grateful tears of parents who had been given a lifeline. And he saw it in Evelyn, the way her eyes sparkled with joy and hope, the way she held her head high, unburdened by the fear and secrecy that had weighed her down for so long. She was finally free to be herself, to share her passion openly. And James, he was free too, free to love her without reservation, without doubt. Their bond, once strained and fragile, was now stronger than ever. They had faced the darkness together and come out the other side, their hearts scarred but unbroken. And as they stood in the center of their gallery on opening night, surrounded by friends, supporters, and the artists whose lives they had touched, James knew that this was just the beginning. To new beginnings, he murmured, raising a glass. Evelyn smiled, her gaze soft and warm. To second chances, she agreed, clinking her glass against his. The gallery's opening was a resounding success, drawing attention from all corners of the art world. Critics raved about the quality of the work on display, but more importantly, they praised the heart behind the project. "This isn't just a gallery," one reviewer wrote. "It's a movement, a revolution of compassion, led by two people who dared to believe that art could change lives." As James read the review aloud, he glanced at Evelyn, his chest swelling with pride. "We did it," he said softly. She nodded, her eyes shining. "Yes, we did." But even as the applause and accolades poured in, they knew that the real work was just beginning. There were still so many people to reach, so many stories waiting to be told. "Are you ready?" James asked one night as they stood on the gallery's balcony looking out over the city. Evelyn turned to him, her smile radiant. "I've been ready my whole life," she said quietly. And as they gazed out into the future, hand in hand, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, stronger, wiser, and more united than ever before. Months passed, and the gallery's influence grew, reaching far beyond what James and Evelyn had originally imagined. It became a sanctuary for artists and craftsmen who had once felt lost and overlooked. Each piece displayed on the gallery walls told a story of resilience, passion, and second chances. And with every exhibition, more people joined the movement, drawn by the authenticity and the emotional depth that defined each artwork. The gallery was more than just a business. It was a living testament to the power of hope and transformation. Evelyn often found herself pausing in the middle of a bustling event just to take it all in. The vibrant colors, the joyful faces, the sense of community that filled the space. But the real turning point came when a renowned art critic visited the gallery. Known for his brutal honesty and discerning eye, his opinion could make or break an artist's career. He spent hours walking through the exhibit, scrutinizing every detail. James watched anxiously from the sidelines, his fingers drumming against his leg. If the critic didn't see the beauty in what they were doing, if he dismissed the gallery as just another charity project, what would that mean for all the artists they were trying to support? Evelyn, however, seemed unfazed. She moved through the crowd with grace, her smile calm and confident. When the critic finally approached them, his expression was inscrutable. "This place is extraordinary," he said slowly, his gaze sweeping over the room. "But what strikes me most is not just the art, it's the people. You've created a space where these artists can truly express themselves, without fear, without judgment. It's inspiring. Relief washed over James like a wave, and he felt himself relax for the first time in hours. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Evelyn squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with pride. The critic's review, published the following week, sent ripples through the art community. He praised the gallery not just for its artistic value, but for its heart and purpose. Overnight, the gallery's name became synonymous with integrity and innovation. Investors and philanthropists began reaching out, wanting to be part of this new, transformative approach to art and support. "This is the beginning of something bigger than us," Evelyn whispered one night, as they lay side by side, staring up at the ceiling. "We're not just helping artists. We're changing the way people see art, the way they see each other." With this newfound momentum, James and Evelyn decided to expand their mission even further. They launched educational programs, offering free workshops and mentorship opportunities for young artists from underprivileged backgrounds. The gallery also started hosting charity auctions, with all proceeds going directly to support struggling families in their community. "We're building a legacy," James remarked one evening, his voice filled with quiet awe, "one that will outlast us both." Evelyn turned to him, her smile soft and radiant. "We already have," she whispered. But despite their success, they never forgot the people who had been there from the start. The young widow and her daughter, the artists who had believed in Evelyn's vision, even when the world didn't. James made a point to check in on them regularly, ensuring that they had everything they needed. The young girl, who had once been too shy to speak, blossomed under Evelyn's mentorship, her artwork gaining recognition and praise. On the night of her first solo exhibition, she presented Evelyn with a painting, an intricate, heartfelt piece depicting a woman standing tall amidst a storm, her eyes fierce and determined. "This is how I see you," the girl murmured, her voice trembling with emotion. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears as she hugged the girl tightly. "You have no idea how much this means to me," she whispered. "It was moments like these, moments of connection, of understanding, that made everything worth it." The gallery was a success, yes, but it was these personal triumphs, these quiet victories, that truly defined their journey. James often found himself stepping back during these events, just to watch Evelyn interact with the artists, the way she encouraged them, uplifted them. She was a force of nature, a beacon of hope in a world that so often seemed dark and indifferent. And James, he had found his own place in this new world. He used his wealth and influence not to control, but to support, to be the safety net that Evelyn's brother and so many others had never had. Together, they became known not just as patrons of the arts, but as advocates for change. "You've turned your money into something priceless," Evelyn told him one night, as they stood on the gallery's balcony, looking out over the city that had become their home. "You've built a legacy of hope." James shook his head, his gaze never leaving hers. "No, we have," he corrected gently. "This was always your vision, Evelyn. I'm just grateful I get to be part of it." Their gallery continued to thrive, becoming a beacon for artists and dreamers everywhere. And yet, they never lost sight of what truly mattered: the people, the stories, the lives they touched. They remained grounded, humble, always remembering the struggles that had brought them to this point. Even as their influence spread, even as their foundation grew, they stayed true to their roots. They made sure that every decision, every step forward, honored the spirit of compassion and resilience that had defined Evelyn's journey from the beginning. In the end, it wasn't the money, the accolades, or even the success of the gallery that mattered most. It was the connections they made, the lives they transformed. James and Evelyn had created something far more valuable than a thriving business. They had built a community, a family bound not by blood, but by shared dreams and unwavering support. And as they stood together, watching the young widow's daughter step up to accept her first award, James knew that this was just the beginning. There were still so many stories to tell, so many people to reach. "Are you happy?" he asked quietly, his gaze fixed on Evelyn's profile. She turned to him, her smile soft but bright. "I am," she whispered. "For the first time in a long time, I really am. James wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. Then so am I, he murmured. And as they stood there, surrounded by the people whose lives they had changed, they knew that they had found something truly priceless, each other. What would you do if you found yourself in James's shoes? Would you have confronted your loved one immediately, or would you have chosen a different path? And what about Evelyn? Do you think she was right to keep her charity work a secret, or should she have shared her struggles with James from the beginning? It's easy to say we trust the people we love, but how would you really react if doubt started to creep in? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe that love can survive secrets, or does trust have to be absolute for a relationship to thrive? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story like this. Because sometimes the most powerful lessons come from the stories we never expect.